Hey, Invigorate friends. Welcome back to the Invigorate Your Autoimmune Journey podcast. I'm your host, Karin Wagner. Today's episode, we're talking about a conversation and topic that generated a lot of buzz and good questions among our community. So I'm incredibly excited and honored to welcome functional medicine practitioner and founder of Root to Leaf Wellness, Meredith Orlowski. Meredith, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Karen. I'm excited to be here.
So, Meredith, we'll for sure get into, of course, what functional medicine is and whatnot. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your experience and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. And I think it goes kind of part and parcel with functional medicine. It all started with my own experience with an autoimmune disease. I was not in the health space prior to getting sick. And after the birth of my second child, I got very sick, just a lot of symptoms that I couldn't explain. Went doctor to doctor to doctor and was not getting any answers. I had I had a goiter, so the swollen thyroid gland, all kinds of, fatigue all across the board, as thyroid symptoms tend to be. And I did eventually find functional medicine, which was kind of a springboard for me for getting some help because I was not getting help the conventional route. And I found through that experience that I was listened to, and I liked the approach of that, okay, let's look at what is happening to create what is the environment that you're experiencing right now, and how can we change those environmental pieces and restore wellness to your body so that your body's not attacking itself anymore. Whereas in the conventional route, as many people have probably experienced, that's not the approach. It's kind of like, well, we can only just manage this, and try to hopefully manage your symptoms. And so the plus side was I had hope, and then I was able to start healing. The minus side is I was kind of handed just a whole laundry list of things to do. And so I saw a functional medicine doctor and a functional dietitian, and it was overwhelming. And I was not really able to do all of the things and didn't have anyone supporting me in making this really drastic lifestyle change. And so that was how I discovered health coaching. So I'm a health coach first and foremost. So became interested in health coaching because I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have someone to kind of help me implement these things so that they're actually effective rather than just this trial and error. So that was kind of my starting point. And then the health coaching was great, but I really craved more know-how of tracing back and figuring out how to help other people. Health coaching really kind of helps you with the basic stuff, which is really important foundational stuff. Don't get me wrong. But we need to go a little further, especially when we're dealing with something like an autoimmune disease. And so that led me to getting trained in functional medicine with the School of Applied Functional Medicine. And so the way that I work now is kind of what I wish I had had when I went through it, where, the knowledge and the expertise to figure out the things that we need to do, but then also helping you to be able to do it. Because it doesn't do a lot of good if we know what to do and then just can't quite get there. So that's probably maybe a longer answer than you intended, but I just think I can't separate the two because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be where I am.
No, that it all builds on each other and why it explains how you are where you are today, because it is such a journey and a process. I want to back up. Conventional medicine wasn't effective for you, or you were craving something more?
It was not effective. I was not going to even receive any treatment.
Okay.
So despite having,
Oh,
I had to go get an ultrasound. They wanted to make sure there was no nodules, which thankfully there weren't. So, this was established that something is wrong. My TSH, if anyone's familiar with thyroid, you don't really have to be, but, one of the markers they use, that one was still technically in range. So even though I had every symptom and, it was manifested in, you could see it on me, um, they were going off my labs alone, which we can get into that a little bit more about, labs. And sometimes, the conventional labs are not telling us the whole story. It was kind of, they were telling me I was just, we're just going to have to wait and see. They weren't going to give me any thyroid medication. And so if I had been okay with that, what would have happened is my thyroid would have gotten even more destroyed along the road. Instead, thankfully, I was like, no, this doesn't make sense. Obviously, something's wrong. There must be something I can do. So thankfully, I, started investigating and was able to make enough changes where, I at least slowed the damage as I was moving along. And I was eventually able to get off medication. And now I'm completely in remission. So I don't take thyroid medication. I don't need it. It's wonderful. But I think that's the key is, either we're either not getting enough care, where we're not really looking at what's causing this so that we can stop it. We're just kind of managing, band-aiding, as we could call it. Or it's just kind of that wait and see approach, and things are getting worse as you're waiting and seeing. So yeah, I'm fortunate in that I was stubborn and was like, no, that doesn't make sense, so yeah.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of our audience or community members are going through that because either they don't exactly know what is the root cause of it, or they can't effectively treat it. So it's just kind of this waiting game of what's going to happen. And ironically, that's exactly what happened to me when I came across functional medicine. It was the medicine just wasn't effective. I was hospitalized and I was like, I need to do something else. And that's when I came across functional medicine. However, like you, and I think a lot of our audience members, and we can talk about it, is once they discover it, yes, there's agency, there's hope. We have a lot more control over this than we previously realized, but it can be very overwhelming. You said you were overwhelmed and just felt like it was so much information. Can you talk a little bit more about how you got through that?
Yeah, so when I initially saw the functional doctor, I mean, I loved her. She listened to me and I feel like I would appreciate it more now, but she was very passionate. So she really wanted to explain to me exactly how everything was working and what she was seeing, which is awesome. But at the time, my eyes were glazing over. And she did recommend some further testing, which I didn't have the funds for at the time. So I kind of felt like that was a little bit of an obstacle in my way. And then really, I think what got me through is just kind of doing what I can, what I could do at that time. And I think just the type of person I am, I wasn't satisfied with being sick. So I kept trying to figure things out and tweak things on my own. If I had known then what I know now, it would have been a lot quicker of a journey. It is what it is. And I think everything happens for a reason, because now I remember what it feels like to be there and to just feel kind of hopeless. And I think one tripping point I had for a long time was I thought, okay, I need to find my root cause. Like I thought it was going to be this one thing that I had to figure out. Oh, there must be this one root cause. And then now I look back and I'm like, okay, it's usually not just one thing. It's usually kind of a basket of things that we need to address. And I think that's where having somebody to partner with you really makes the difference between success and stuck. Because if doing something, you have certain interventions that you're doing and you're stalled and not getting any results, or maybe just not enough, then usually it's going to be, okay, well, what are we missing? And so if you have someone that's able to kind of follow along and map out you, then it's easier to kind of say, okay, let's see, well, let's explore this. We haven't looked at this, or have we gone, what we call upstream in functional medicine. We want to keep going upstream. So if somebody has some sort of an imbalance in the gut, well, what's upstream from that, right? We want to keep going back until we can't go any further back. Then we found the root. And so a lot of things can look like root causes and you still haven't gone far enough. So I think for me, it was just the tenacity that I just happened to have. And I'm grateful for that, because as I think this audience knows, when you don't feel good, you don't have the energy, and especially if, trying to look into health or especially if you don't think of yourself as a science person, which I certainly didn't, it's just even thinking about it can be exhausting. And so I'm very grateful that I was able to just take the steps and learn as I went. And I think it's because I just had this calling to do this eventually when I would get there. But it was a process and it was a journey. And, invigorate your journey. I mean, no matter what we do, it is a journey. It's not going to be a lickety split A to B. We all wish it could be, but these things don't develop overnight, and so they don't resolve overnight either. And that's something that I really make sure that, I set that expectation when I work with somebody that, okay, think about how many years, if you think back, you usually can think of little signs that you saw along the way that were like, oh, I could kind of see something was off, but I didn't put the pieces together. So it's a similar process when we're going the other direction. It's just kind of peeling the onion, if you will, of, we have to have that patience to recognize that we are making progress, and it's probably never going to be as fast as we want. And that's just part of the journey.
Well, life is never as easy or as fast as we want, right?
Right.
You alluded to it and started to get into the difference between conventional labs and the lab testing that you do. And this was a really key turning point in me understanding the two different approaches. So can you talk a little bit more about how you approach differently than some of the conventional labs?
Mm-hmm. So when I am working with someone, I always start with, what lab work do you already have? And that is very often, just your basic things that we get at our physical every year. That's a really good starting place. If someone has thyroid data, that's always going to be relevant. I start there, and then I start by assessing them with a very detailed health history first. So I never start with, okay, you need to go get a comprehensive stool test. You need to go get some, heavy metal testing. That's not my starting place ever. I think for some people, that is what they do to start off. And some people want that. That's not my approach. I don't look at labs in a silo. The other piece of that is when we're looking at labs that you would get from your conventional doctor, I'm reading those differently as a functional medicine person. I'm looking more for optimal. So the range is going to be a lot smaller than, your normal, abnormal. I mean, sometimes you'll see, I'm sure we've all had that moment of disappointment, which is weird to say disappointment, but, when you have your labs done and you're kind of, because you want an answer, you're almost hoping for something to be off, because then it at least is an answer, right? I remember feeling that way and being kind of disappointed that everything was normal, which is really strange to say. And I remember thinking, geez, that's a really huge range. So if you think of it that way, and then also that our population overall is so sick now that we kind of don't want to be in the normal range, because that's not healthy. So functional medicine, we make the ranges smaller because we want to look at optimal. That's one piece. And then we're also looking at relationships, and we're looking at things a little differently. So one that we can look at is, say, B12. Okay. That is one that a lot of people have heard of. So if we think about that, if you get it run from your conventional doctor, which a lot of them aren't even really going to run it, um, something that's really what I would consider suboptimal is going to be marked normal. But beyond that, even if it is, say, in the optimal range by my standards, then I'm going to say, okay, I'm not going to stop there. I'm also going to look at your MCV, which is, the size of your red blood cells. So if they're really big, they're not going to be making it out into your extremities and you're going to get that tingling, right? So that's another piece. If that's, a little bit higher, I'm going to say, okay, that's maybe further confirming B12 insufficiency. And then there's another marker, MMA, which is methylmalonic acid, that your body's going to produce more of that in the absence of B12. So we want to confirm these things in relationship. So that's just one example of, it's not a matter of in or out. Like, yeah, okay, your B12 looks great, but if you're still experiencing neuropathy or some cognitive issues, then I'm not going to say, oh, well, your labs say it's normal, so that's the end of the story. I think that's the main difference that I really want people to understand, that, even if you've had, say, a thyroid panel run or something like that. This was my personal experience, and many people that I talk to, that doesn't necessarily rule that out for you. There's a lot of other things that we want to look at. And I think a really important thing to keep in mind is we're paying attention to your symptoms and to what you tell us your experience is. I think that is the biggest disservice that people in this, predicament, for lack of a better word, are experiencing. It's almost like, oh, it's in your head, or, well, I don't know, maybe you just need an antidepressant, or maybe you just need a steroid cream for your psoriasis, or whatever it is. It's dismissing the person's experience. Coming to you for help is the one living in their body day over day. And so what better source of information could you ask for as a practitioner? And I think that's really undervalued in going to your average doctor. And if I don't want to disparage doctors at all, the system is set up against them in many cases. I mean, how long does your doctor have with you to go over this stuff? 15 minutes? And they can get penalized for going over that time. They can get penalized for running extra labs for you. So it's really, their hands are tied. And there's a lot of doctors that really would love to do more and would love to give you answers. And they're constrained by the system.
For sure. Absolutely. So how, for someone like me who's seeing a rheumatologist, I'm on a lot of medications to manage and suppress this. How do I work with you simultaneously? How do you work with the rheumatologist? Like, how does this all fit together?
So typically what I'm doing as a health coach, because I'm not a doctor, I am typically providing you with education. So I'm going to present to you, okay, based on what you've shared with me, it would make sense to me if you tried, X diet or X intervention, or it looks like these nutrients may be, insufficient for your needs. I am not able to prescribe anything or technically recommend. So what I do is I present this information to clients, and then I tell them, please check with your provider. One of the most common things that I'll do is, if we want to get labs run that their doctor can run, I will write them up something that explains why we want it, to kind of help them to advocate for themselves. Because otherwise they can get dismissed pretty easily. But if you come in and kind of make your case, then a lot of times they'll say, oh, okay, because they're just not going to have time to really dig into why. So if it's not, something typical that they do, they're just going to say, no, I can't run that for you. So that is something that I do. And then if somebody's doctor has questions specifically for me, we can certainly talk about it. I think only once have I really had to do that, where they wanted to ask me certain questions, and I welcome it. But usually it's more me providing information that you can then share with your provider. And of course, I am not equipped to, contradict your provider. It's up to you to advocate for yourself with my support.
You don't make recommendations. For the specific example, sidebar, I had avascular necrosis in a number of joints from steroids that I had been on, which accelerated the bone degeneration. But then I went out to see this specialist in Cincinnati. He figured out that I couldn't absorb B vitamins, and I've been taking supplements ever since, and I haven't had another bone issue since then. So if you come across something like that in someone, like clearly that you would be able to identify that, would I then, you'd say, go back to your doctor and figure out like a supplement plan, or could you like make some of those recommendations?
So the distinction is I do create supplement plans for people, but I always have the caveat that
Okay.
this is up to you to do it. Just legally, I can't prescribe anything. So yes, but I do create a plan
Got
for
it.
you. I just can't legally say this is what you need to do. I just educate you about it, about why
Sure.
this is the thing. So yeah, and in the case of the B vitamins and not being able to absorb that, that's something that I would want to question. Well, why? What's going on that's making that absorption not happen?
Okay.
Right? Because there are certain parts of our digestive tract, certain areas that are responsible for different vitamins and mineral absorption. That would be something that I would be, my mind would say, okay, well, what's going on in the gut? Why is this not absorbing? So we don't. So in functional medicine, to kind of go back to the basics of your question that I perhaps didn't fully answer, is we're approaching the body as its natural state is one of wellness, and it is always trying to get back to that for you. And what our job is to figure out, okay, what are the things that are coming up and getting in the way of this? And of course, in the world that we live in now, there's no shortage of things that are going to get in the way of our wellness. And some of us, have a little bit more resiliency for longer than others. And it really is so utterly unique that no two people are the same. So even two people with the same diagnosis are not the same. Their basket of environmental and, lifestyle and all of these things, they're going to be completely different person to person. Of course, there'll be some overlap. But we approach each person as what we call N=1. So there's nobody else like you. So we look at the person, not, this is somebody with X disease. We look at you as an individual. And I think that's key because it doesn't happen the same for everybody. Nobody has the exact same experiences and exposures and traumas and all of that stuff. I mean, that it's utterly unique, right? So I think treating it that way makes so much sense, especially when we're dealing with something very complex.
Yeah. There's many different autoimmune diseases. Even when like Chris and I, who he co-hosts, and we both have lupus, but it has manifested itself in different ways. So to your point, like even though it's the same diagnosis, we're all individually different. So I think functional medicine is by far and away the most advanced in getting at truly treating these diseases.
Yeah. And I think, we're going to continue to see more advancements through functional medicine for autoimmune disease, which is wonderful news. And I think it's because we just take that approach of always trying to learn more. And if you go to, the conventional medicine route is, there's no cure for it. I had a client with Crohn's that the GI doctor said, it doesn't matter what you eat. And she said, I knew that wasn't right, because then when we finally worked together, I was like, no, it actually makes a big difference what you eat. And she's like, I knew that. Like, we know these things intuitively. And then when we go and hear something like that, it's like, really? Because that doesn't make sense to me. So I just think it's such a, and I remember feeling that too. And maybe you've experienced it yourself, of like finally finding someone that acknowledges what you knew, that you were told not to trust yourself.
I had a rheumatologist he was fantastic. Not knocking him, but he did. I had asked about diet and if there was anything I could do, and he was like, "Well, we can always eat better." But it wasn't until a nurse practitioner actually told me about trying to give up gluten and dairy, and that was the biggest game changer for me. So they're just not there to where the functional medicine practitioners are.
Right. But I think that's changing.
Absolutely. Totally know that there's not a specific timeline for this. Can you give us an idea? Are we talking months? Like how long does someone typically work with you?
Usually I'd say the average is about 6 months. And, that varies. I have some people
Okay.
that do a little less, some people that do more. It really depends on what they have going on and how many layers there are to get to a root cause. Another big piece is how much they're willing to change at once. Some people are like rearing to go and they're ready to just take it all on. Others are like, nope, I can only do one thing at a time. So it really depends on where you are. And I think, excuse me, the further we go on our healing journey and the more success we have, we can move faster because we're more galvanized and plus we have more energy. That's probably the most important thing I guess the most impactful thing that I see is a return of energy. Because then you feel like, oh, I didn't realize how, it's almost like coming out of a fog when you just feel so exhausted all the time, and to get some more energy, it's like waking up. And then you're able to do more. So it really, I wish I had a more clear answer, but I'd say about, for someone with a pretty entrenched dynamic going on, we could be looking at like, maybe 9 months, 12 months. But I'd say the minimum would be about 6 months to really get going, and to see some benefits.
Okay, so one community member says I paid the standard $300 to $500 for initial lab testing and then paid for supplements, followed the diet. So I'm assuming that would be some sort of AIP or GAP diet, but I haven't seen results. How do you measure the progress of your patients with autoimmune diseases?
Yeah. The biggest thing is meeting together every other week. And before every session, I have a symptom tracker. And so it's like a 2-page thing. It's pretty easy to fill out, but they number it in severity. So we're tracking. That way it's very easy to pinpoint and to course correct where necessary. And I hate hearing that someone has invested, money, time, and most of all hope, and not experienced any results, or maybe just really minor. That's pretty demoralizing. And I would just encourage them not to give up, because we've all had some disappointments. And really the best way is tracking your symptoms. And it can be kind of tedious at times, I understand, but it's the best way to get insight about what you're doing. Because even if you've done testing, as we said before, not everything is going to show up on a lab. And I don't know what the diet was they were doing. We're assuming, but even within those protocols, so like a GAPS protocol, for example, that can be really high in histamine. Well, that might not be a good fit for somebody, especially say you don't have enough B vitamins. That's going to impair your ability to get rid of histamine. Or if you have damage to your gut lining, there's an enzyme called DAO that we need to help process the histamine. So could it be that it just wasn't a good fit for them? It's hard to say, oh, if you have an autoimmune disease, this is what diet you should do. Because even within those, there can still be some other factors, and there can be even an AIP, one of those things you could very well be sensitive to as well. So that would be an opportunity to say, okay, well, what are we missing? let's try some tweaks. And in that case, maybe a food sensitivity test would be helpful rather than just following. I mean, I don't know if they got that initially, but just assuming if they didn't get that test and just were put on a diet, perhaps that is at play. Or, maybe there's some sort of a microbial overgrowth that's not being addressed. It just sounds like if no results were being experienced, that they didn't go deep enough. That would be my guess. But yeah, it's really frustrating. And I think that is one of the main benefits to getting a really deep intake with somebody and using that as a puzzle piece along with the labs rather than, just, oh, here's my protocol for this. And I'm not sure if that's what this person experienced or not, but, I think that's a real temptation. Like we want that, oh, this, then this, oh, you have this, do this. And that's what we see a lot out in, the internet world is, we see these people that got amazing results with this. And it's like this little formula. And some people that might work great for, and that's awesome. I'm not against it. But if you're the person it didn't work for, then, that chips away at your hope and your belief. And one big thing that I make sure I care for when I work with people is that placebo effect. If we've gone to a doctor and been treated not so nicely, or, having an experience like that where we didn't get results, that really makes a difference. And having these sort of negative thoughts on repeat in our brain, this can actually contribute to your autoimmune, because that's a trigger too.
You're referring to the stress of it, right?
Correct. Yes. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that brings us into this next great question, which comes up quite a bit, is how important is stress management in managing my autoimmune disease, and what techniques do you recommend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is huge because, and I just want to also address that stress can be mental, emotional, but it can also be physiological. So if we're talking about some sort of a dysbiosis in the gut or some sort of a chronic viral activation, that is a stress as well. So I'm kind of referring to both when I say stress. But as far as mental, emotional, then yes, that loop of negative thoughts. I think it's about 80 to 90% of our thoughts are repetitive, and about the same percentage is negative for most people. So something that is extremely beneficial is to start using mindfulness to become aware of your thoughts and be the observer and question your thoughts. We don't often think that we have a choice about what we think. But I can tell you from personal experience that yes, you absolutely do have a choice. And it doesn't mean you're lying to yourself either. I think a lot of times we think that like, oh, if I'm positive, I'm just, lying to myself and I'm not facing reality. When in fact, that's not true. We can always choose to have a different perspective. So mindfulness is something that I'm a big fan of. Also meditation is really important, but even just breathing. So, and it's not that I don't recommend meditation to people all the time, but that can seem like a tall order to some people. So often I'll just say, well, how about you take a little breathing break? So, say every time you get in your car to go somewhere, you just take, 3 deep breaths. Or every time you go to the bathroom, take 3 deep breaths, any just like mini moments that you can work into your day just to kind of give yourself that little reset. That's really important. And I think another thing that's overlooked is sleep. Not getting good quality sleep is a source of stress as well.
We always jump to how long is this going to be? How much is this going to cost? But it's really about kind of changing your lifestyle and learning to live well.
Yes.
So how else do you kind of help people make that transformation?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of where the coaching piece really shines, is we are not just keeping you accountable. I think a lot of people think coaching is about, oh, I'm answering to somebody, they're keeping me accountable. really just the tip of the iceberg. What a coach does is they teach you how to be accountable to yourself. So we're changing how we think about things. So big one with, I hate even to say restrictive, but they are restricted diets, right? If you're not allowed to have certain things, then yeah, you're restricting things. I get it. And a lot of, we can feel kind of isolated. We can feel, woe is me, left out. Completely understandable. And especially like trying to go out to a restaurant. I mean, it's pretty tough. That is a situation where we want to cultivate two things. We want to make sure that we're looking at the big picture and we're looking at the pain versus the reward. If we want to call it pain, to me, the pain is being ill. I don't, if I know I'm making progress, it's not so painful to me to feel like I'm not going to eat this food. But that's just not our natural inclination. We don't think like that naturally. We want to, it's really, the coaching helps you to kind of explore the thoughts that you're having and say, okay, well, is this really true? Am I really left out? Going to a restaurant, maybe, but am I more left out when I can't, say go on a hike with my friends, or when I can't go on vacation, or when I'm missing work, that I love to do, whatever it is. It's really about a perspective shift, and it's not about somebody telling you how to think. It's just helping you explore what is true to you, because we can easily have these kind of thoughts, and if we look at them, we find out they're not really that true. So the coaching is really important. And I think the more that you go along, the easier it becomes. And it's not about willpower. I hate willpower. There's no such thing. Or if there is, it's not going to get us very far, right? We have to be willing. And that's the thing, not everybody's going to be ready to take this on. You have to be in a place where you're ready to think about things differently. Because if you're not willing to change how you think about things, then yeah, it's probably not going to be too fun. But I would argue that that's a choice. And, if you're not there yet, it's okay. I mean, it took me a while to get there too. It is what it is. And I meet people where they are, and we go from there. No judgment, nothing. We just, let's see where we can go from where you are. And if you're not ready to, make I hate sacrifice is not the word I would choose. I can't think of another word. But, if you're not willing to make certain sacrifices in the name of healing, then you really ought to look at how you're thinking about things. And let's look at what's important to you, what's really important here. Because it's a matter of thinking of things in the long term versus the short term. And again, the more success you have, it gets easier. And then you probably don't need to restrict forever. Some things may be, like gluten or something, that may be gone forever, but other things maybe not. And so most of the time I like to approach things with curiosity and, with an attitude of experimentation, because at the end of the day, we could get every single lab test, we could get, we could scrutinize every little thing, and it's still going to be a lot of experimenting, because there are just some things that we can't measure. And so I think having just this attitude, kind of, being like a kid in a way, just being willing to experiment, being willing to try, and also, just being open to changing things, because sometimes we think we know better. And then when we look back, I mean, I've definitely been there myself. I thought I had things figured out pretty good. And then, you make a shift and you're like, oh, okay, that's not how it is at all. And that's really a cool aha to have. And I love seeing that happen for people when I work with them, that, oh, it's like something clicks into place. Like I can do this.
Yeah, and once you get those first couple wins, and you get a little bit of momentum, and it really, it doesn't seem as daunting. At first, it seemed really hard, but now you figure out your replacements. You don't even think twice about it after a while.
Right. And and I should say that too. I don't just, leave people hanging. I do have a lot of resources that I offer, especially for gluten-free and, things to make, because that was something, back when I went through this, you couldn't get gluten-free bread at the grocery store. Like there wasn't that availability that there is now. And not that I'm a huge fan of gluten-free products, but they can be a really nice stepping stone. And there are some okay ones out there. But going through the dairy-free, going through lemon, all of that. I have all of those materials that I can share with people to help them. And then we also need to bring in that mindset piece as well.
That's where I think a coach could be a tremendous help, because trying to navigate all that on your own can just feel way overwhelming and daunting.
Oh, yep. Yep.
Meredith, we have time for one more question. People are concerned with environmental toxins or harmful chemicals in personal and household products. Are there any specific ones that we should be aware of? Like, how much should we be concerned about these toxins with autoimmune diseases?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say very concerned. You don't want to be adding anything onto your body that it has to combat or detox, right? Because you're taking away energy from other things that can trigger your immune system, and all kinds of horrible things, and especially women. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the majority of autoimmune cases are women. I mean, think of all the things that we're putting on ourselves every day in, cosmetics, hair care, perfumes, and then, we've got cleaning products in the home. That is one of the first things that I ask people to take a look at. And it doesn't mean you have to round everything up and throw it away and spend a couple $100, but just as things run out, replace them with something cleaner. That's a real concern. So obviously processed foods, there's all kinds of chemicals in these things. I don't think if you're dealing with an autoimmune, you're probably not eating a lot of processed foods. I think most of us kind of figure that one out pretty quick. If they've got any kind of guidance anyway. That's a big one. Also, if we think about even once you're eating whole foods, we want to think about pesticide exposure. So even doing something like the Clean 15 from Environmental Working Group, every year they put out a list of, the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's a list of, these are the produce that you should never eat unless it's organic, because strawberries is the worst one pretty much every year as long as I can remember. And then the Clean 15, I mean, this helps people save money, right? Because organic can get expensive. So the Clean 15 are ones that like, oh, okay, well, you can eat these that are not organic. That's something that I think is really important, especially when we're looking at, anything gut related, which when we're dealing with autoimmune, leaky gut is one of the legs of that stool of autoimmunity. So there's almost always some sort of intestinal permeability. And so we don't want to be eating these pesticides that are going to be damaging our gut and our microbes. Okay. So those are big ones. And then also a lot of people there's a lot more awareness around mold. So, depending on what sort of symptoms someone has, I may recommend they look into getting their home tested for mold. Sometimes you just know, like if it smells musty, right, then we can be pretty sure. But that's something really that people should be aware of. But definitely starting with personal care and cleaning products. There's a lot more options out there now where you can make homemade cleaning products. I did that for a long time, just made my own cleaning products. And they work pretty good. It's not that hard. It takes a second to mix something up. But yeah, that's definitely key. Because that's one of the triggers that we would see in autoimmunity is toxins for sure. Yeah, something like living near a golf course, right, where they're spraying all kinds of stuff, or if you live in a farming area where maybe they're not organic farms. I mean, this is all stuff that's getting into our water supply. So that's another one that would be important, is filtering. If you can get a home filter, that's great, but those are pricey too. But at least drinking filtered water, getting a filter on your shower, these all of these things can add up. So I don't want to overwhelm anybody by any means. But just choose one thing. Like, if, say, every month you choose one thing in your home to change, or, if you're really motivated, maybe one thing every 2 weeks, right? So, oh, this month I'm going to get a shower filter, right? Next month I'm going to get, this. Like, it doesn't have to be, a lot of times people freeze in action, and this isn't just with autoimmune, this is any kind of change, whether we want to lose weight or whatever it is. We think of, we see somebody who's succeeded, right? And we think of, oh, I have to do all of these things. And obviously we can't do all of them right out of the gate. So then we just do nothing because we feel just completely overwhelmed and we freeze. So I think it's really important to just recognize, do one thing, do what you can do, and celebrate yourself for it, for sure, because it is making a difference. And the more of those little things you do, the more of a difference it will make for you.
Yeah, and I like focusing on just one thing at a time because it can just get overwhelming very quickly. Even if you need to take a little break, you can always come back to it, but just do what you can wherever you're at. So
exactly. Messy moves the needle.
Meredith, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else that you think would be important to share with our community? And of course, please tell us where people can learn more about you and your work.
I think if I could leave everybody with just don't give up, don't stop trying. If you're not there yet, it doesn't mean you won't get there, because, it is a journey, like we were saying earlier. And I think the most important thing to do is to not let yourself get discouraged. Of course, we're going to have moments of feeling discouraged. That's just part of it. But overall, just remembering that, okay, well, this didn't work, or, this kind of worked. I think I'm on the right path, and just keep going. Don't give up. And, if you've had experience with, somebody that didn't really help you, don't let that stop you from trying somebody else that can help you, right? It's just part of it. And to me, when I look back, I think taking little pieces from everything along the way, like breadcrumbs, I can see in retrospect that, okay, that was a good part of the journey, even though it seemed terrible at the time. Now I see what that taught me as well. And I think having that kind of faith, I guess, that everything will be okay. We're just meant to grow from everything. And even when things seem really dark, it doesn't mean that the light won't come. I think as far as where you can find me, maybe the best place is I do have a Facebook group as well, where I share a lot of education there. It is not autoimmune focused, but I teach a lot about the gut. That's a passion of mine, because like that to me is where we always want to start when we have any sort of an imbalance. So I do a lot of teaching about that there. Also can be found on my website, which is roottoleafwellness.com. I'm on Instagram, Meredith FX Coach. So I would love to connect and answer any other questions too. So if people think of questions later, they're welcome to, share them with you. If you want to share them with me, that's fine. If people are watching the replay, but I know what it's like to go through the autoimmune roller coaster. And it took a while, but I am in remission, as I said. So it is possible. And I really want to underline that for people.
Meredith, thank you for being here and providing hope to people and giving them agency to get their health back. Your work is incredible and just so needed. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Drop us a note and like and share this episode so we can reach all of our community members. Thank you so much, and we'll be back soon.